I got you to click on this video, so why don't you stay a while and listen, where I tell you everything that is wrong with Ukrainian counteroffensive and why I think that everyone who is telling you that the counteroffensive has begun are wrong. Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Please, 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 no rotten tomatoes. This is not a clickbait. Let me explain. So what happened? Well, a couple of days ago, Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Hanna Maler, has actually announced that counteroffensive has already begun, and movements and attacks that we see on the south side of Ukraine that is right now being executed by the Ukrainian armed forces is already part of the counteroffensive. Just let me switch to this camera for a little bit. So these attacks happening on the south side, they technically can be considered as part of a greater counteroffensive plan. Yes. However, this channel, we're focusing mostly around like a layman terms and layman understanding like myself. In my perspective, a counteroffensive is action when Russians get their teeth caved in by the fist of Ukrainian armed forces. That's what I consider a counteroffensive, right? And I'm expecting that a lot of the people watching me also, when we're talking counteroffensive, that's what we're kind of talking about. So if we categorize this in some kind of terms that we can understand, then counteroffensive operations for a layman would be noticeable taking of land in a sense that Ukrainians are advancing and are able to disrupt and retake in a somewhat short period of time Russian fortified positions. So some of the Russian strongholds would be overtaken by Ukrainians. And we're not talking just like the first line defense, more like getting to the second line of defense and so on. Or second part, what I would also consider as a counteroffensive has started, is that Ukrainians have engaged Russians in a fight in a manner where Russians are essentially almost retreating positions. So Ukrainians are trying to break through Russians and trying to slice and dice and put them in positions where they cannot escape. So Ukrainians squeezing the Russians out and so on. Or at least Ukrainians kind of penetrate kind of deep, and we notice an extensive combat like that is taking place where Ukrainians are clearly on the offensive because they are enabling a lot of their hidden resources. For example, the same brigades that we know have been training. That is what would be counteroffensive. So just fighting on the line between Ukrainians and Russians might be part of the preparation stage. However, even for preparation stage, I have criteria. Like, for example, I'm expecting Ukrainian preparation stage to go in depth. For a beginning of like what layman like me considers a counteroffensive, there would need to be strikes that would go deep towards the second, third, and fourth lines of defense of the Russians. We would see their supply chains being struck massively. We would see their ammunition depots being struck massively. We would see aviation. We would see significant resources being dedicated. Remember that war is also information space denial for your enemy. So it would be in Ukrainian benefits to right now raise Russian awareness that the counteroffensive is coming because there's some action happening in the south. And then Russian, okay, let's be ready. And then nothing happens. And then Ukrainians do it again. I'm giving out of the top of my head like an example why would this be done by an official person stating. So there is a lot of information warfare component that can be happening with this notice of the counteroffensive. So to put kind of the point very, very shortly to write it home, if counteroffensive would start, you would not need to write the comments to me asking, Georgie, do you think counteroffensive has started? You would know. So that will be your check going forward, staying on my channel. If someone else starts asking, Georgie, what do you think about counteroffensive? Ask him in the comment section, why does he need to ask me? Because counteroffensive will be extremely obvious to everyone. Let's talk front lines. What I already basically discussed, this is the southern part. There are many places on the south part, but here we see that Ukrainians are essentially poking and trying to reduce the gray zone in between Russians and themselves where it wasn't reduced before, and they're trying to kind of poke some of the initial Russian units. Remember, by the Russian doctrine, in the front lines, it's always the lowest motivated troops. We discussed this in a video, maybe I'll link it somewhere. It's always the lowest motivated troops. So if you hear somewhere, someplace that Ukrainians engaged Russians and then they defeated them or Russians ran, it is not uncommon. It is not uncommon by the Russian doctrine. Like the poorest equipped, the poorest motivated, the poorest anything troops are always, by the Soviet and Russian military doctrines, are on the front lines in a defensive situation. Then we go into the situation around Bakhmut, which is great. Again, there are plenty of daily channels that can explain you what's happening, right? There was a situation where Russians kind of took some of the north parts, then Ukrainians, for example, took back the north parts, yada yada. What you need to know is that Ukrainians have used railways as a nice defensive barrier. They created this nice kind of place where they try to hold Russians off. So Russians decided, okay, this is not already the whole city of Bakhmut. So now we can completely utilize the Syrian tactic, especially by utilizing airplanes, because they're using a lot of these glided bombs. They are reducing the buildings to rubble, like complete rubble. There is nowhere to hide, nowhere to go. So now there is a situation that is happening that there is a railway, and beyond the railway, because Russians have struck it in with a lot of artillery, they pushed the Ukrainians out, yes, but it created like this exclusion zone with a lot of open field where any side cannot really have defensive positions which it can hold and like go into and be protected from artillery. So as soon as they show their faces, either Ukrainians or Russians, instantly artillery starts attacking it. It doesn't mean that it's not impassable, but it's a very tough barrier because Russians cannot advance, because Ukrainian, remember I told you last time, they had artillery supplies increased, so they have plenty of artillery to kick Russians out as well. And what we're seeing now, that along this railway, it's almost 2 weeks that Ukrainians are holding this line, and I'm pretty sure they will still continue holding it. Russians sometimes try to kind of advance, and they take some of the, for example, blocks of the city, north, south, doesn't matter, wherever. But at some point later, Ukrainians might as well push them back because artillery doesn't allow Russians to hold these positions. That's the situation that you just need to be aware in Bakhmut. Otherwise than that, you're welcome to follow reporting from Ukraine, Dennis, any other daily channels if you just need your kind of dose of daily discussions, which streets have been layered with Russian corpses. You're welcome. One thing I need to note is this place. This place has become kind of infamous. I'm not sure if you've seen on my Discord, join the Discord. This is the place where the Da Vinci wolves have been fighting Russians in a close combat, and that's a quite an intensive place. So from here again, it is so far said that Russians have advanced this far, but it is unclear if they're able to hold on to this position. But so far, situation in Bakhmut is still, I don't even know how to describe, because it's really bad. It's really bad. By kind of like, by my own standards, as I always said, like I would already retreated, but Ukrainians have a lot bigger balls than I do. So they're like, yep, we are gonna fight and we're gonna kill as many as we can, and they're keep doing this job very nicely. Avdiivka, same as before. We now get the reports from Russians. Yes, okay, we're being sent by this Russian command, awful command is sending us to suicide missions, and Ukrainians are happily taking it. They are happily destroying any Russian mobilized men that are being sent to this direction and then just sent to storm Avdiivka. It's weird. I actually don't know why they keep doing it, but I guess this is something that just Russians enjoy. Maybe they enjoy other Russians being killed, so they just continue doing it. Sometimes with vehicles, sometimes without vehicles. That's the two major points. So all in all, we can roughly say that the front lines are stable. Ukrainians are holding the front lines well. Despite the toughening situation around Bakhmut, it is toughening at the pace of a snail. Someone really made the calculations and said if a snail would start going through Bakhmut at the start of the siege of that city, it would already cross it. So Russians are slower than the snail. That's how the situation is. If you like this video so far, do the YouTube thing, press the like, share, subscribe buttons, whatnot. If you want to support me, you can do it at Buy Me a Coffee or just press the heart with the dollar sign, which is a super thanks. I would appreciate it. Otherwise, check out the first comment to support Ukrainian military. To wrap this video up, I want to talk about the topic that I've heard around. It's not being asked from me, but I think it's worth addressing. And that is are Russians complete idiots or are they adapting? Like I saw a discussion that despite us calling Russians complete idiots and despite them like trying to come out as the world's dumbest army, they're still succeeding at it. But some people say they're still adapting. Like, they're having some kind of new weapon technologies. They're using drones. They're trying to, for example, battle tactical groups are not being used anymore. They are now doing smaller squads. So we see adaptation happening on the Russian side. And my answer to that is yes. Yes, they do. That is just the rules of war. We all have seen this in pretty much every war. Every war, no matter how stupid or smart or whatever the sides are, there's always an part of the adaptation. Even if the war would be starting with sticks and stones, at some point during that war, we would see some kind of specific improvements in tactics, improvements in equipment, improvements in manpower, whatnot. That's just the laws of war. So when people say that Russia is adapting, yes. However, a lot of that analysis, and especially if I read it on some kind of weird Western media, is disregarding that Ukraine is also adapting, right? So all adaptation, any kind of adaptation that is happening of war can be of two nature. I call it like it's not something that I read, but like generally I understand the concept. Adaptation number one is reduction of weaknesses. It is when you have a very significant weakness and you just remove it. So, as an example, Russian aviation used to fly all over Ukraine and then they stopped. Now, it didn't increase the Russian potential to use this aviation, but it kind of stop loss prevention adaptation. That was happened. And then the second adaptation is like your utilization of the enemy's current setup to overcome them with your new improvements. So that might be equipment, tactics, whatnot. This can be like a Wunderwaffe stage or whatnot. Because there's been a discussion that it's very funny. Like some Russian propagandists said that they're gonna launch 3-ton bombs glided on wings, which is like completely impossible. It's just stupidest idea ever. But people believed it. People believed it. So what am I saying here? So both sides evolve. Like when we talk about Russia evolving, we also need to say yes, and Ukraine is evolving as well. That is just the nature of warfare. what we need to understand is that people are saying, oh, we cannot call Russians dumb because they are evolving. We can. Because Russians, while they're evolving, they are not evolving past the fundamental mistakes that they made to start this war and to win this war. They have put themselves in a position where there is little to no room for maneuver. And this evolution, it might seem interesting on paper, right? You know what they're doing. The problem is, right now, they've put themselves in a situation where a lot of these evolutions, they are not bringing the results. So, for a purely academical discussion about whether evolution of the military can help it be more effective, yes, and efficient, yes. But if we're talking if those evolutions can help Russia win the war, no, because problems of Russia are fundamental. It's the problems of command, it's the problems of the structure of their government, it's the problems of political decision making over military one, it's the problem of Franjo, which is just impossible to fix in a short term scenario. Those are decade projects to fix. None of those will be fixed during this war that, if we believe Budanov, is going to end pretty well. And with that, I want to say to you, Slava Ukraini, I love you all, guys, and I'll see you next time.